I'm Josh Johnson. I'm the archivist for the Pendleton District Commission. I'm the collections manager and curator for the Bart Garrison Agricultural Museum here in Pendleton. We put this together, this exhibit on Black history, kind of focusing on the Pendleton community and the Black history of Pendleton specifically. So we highlighted a lot of the schools, a lot of the early Black churches, and kind of talking about the leading figures and stores and places and stories of the Black Pendleton community.
And anything surprise you when you were putting this together?
There's just been some interesting tidbits, that we've kind of figured out over time. Some of the other different named communities. So everyone knows about the hundreds that were around the Keese Barn.
Remind people what that is.
The hundreds. So the Keese Barn was the antique store, cafe, grocery store, any kind of business he had in there, operated by Ben Keese from the early 1900s all the way to his death in the 1970s. And it was a gathering space for the Black community here in Pendleton. It was called the Hundreds because of the hundreds of people that would gather over there in the western side of Pendleton around his barn. And that was one of the focal points of the Black community. If you were standing in front of the Keese Barn, you were a half a mile from the Black schools, you were a half a mile from most of the Black churches in the area, and it became this focal point for African American life in this area. So we wanted to focus on the Keese Barn, and just because he was such a leading figure for such a long time, and there was such an effort made to preserve that structure after his death, but it never came through due to just a lack of funding. So now there's kind of like an art installation, I'm not sure what you would call it, that's out there now. And even now, when you drive by on certain mornings, there are people gathered out there just talking, and it's still a focal point for the community.
And y'all have a model of that here.
Yes, so the model we have, I think, was put together in the 1980s to kind of represent what the barn would look like, because for a long time after his death, they wanted to turn it into kind of an upstate Black history museum, an upstate Black history archive, continue it as, just a community center. And it never went through just because of the tremendous amount of funding that was required. So the building was demolished, I think, in the early 2000s. So other than photographs and people's memories in this model, there's really nothing left of the Keese Barn.
And for a small town in the upstate, Pendleton has a pretty rich Black history, don't it?
Oh, it has a very rich Black history. Pendleton is one of the oldest communities in the upstate. It was originally the county seat for the Pendleton district. So when in the early 1800s, Oconee, Anderson, and Pickens counties were all one county, or all one district, and that was the Pendleton district. And Pendleton was founded to be the county seat of that massive section. Of course, over time, they realized as the population grew and judicial districts had to change, that's when we see this dividing of the Pendleton district into Oconee, Anderson, and Pickens as we think of it today. And it's always had a very rich Black history. It's always had a higher Black population than many of the surrounding communities in general. There was a lot of plantation infrastructure here. Many of the people who founded Pendleton or moved in early on in its history were Charlestonians. They were rich people off the coast. They came up here to build their summer homes because it kept them out of the malaria and the yellow fever and smallpox and tropical diseases like that. Well, when they came up here, they still had that enslaved infrastructure as part of it. They brought their slaves from the coast to here to operate these farms. Half of the historic district for Pendleton are the homes of enslavers, people who had these large plantations both here and on the coast. Ashtabula and Woodburn are two surviving examples of just large plantations built by Charlestonians here in the upstate. So there's always been a large Black community, and because of that community element has survived, and especially after the Civil War, we see the schools and churches happen, and it's just always had a very thriving, has had its own identity, and that has led to having these historical things. Many smaller communities, and I would still consider Pendleton a smaller community, don't have as rich of a Black history just because of, population or demographic changes and everything like that. So, we always want to highlight these kind of forgotten sections and these parts of town that no one really considers that are historically African American, and they're historically very vibrant places that we just don't consider anymore.
So you've put together 2 exhibits for Black History Month. One's here at the Pendleton Library and the other's at Town Hall. What kind of things can people see if they...
Well, so we, at Hunter's Store, we're the archive for the Tri-County area. We were established in 1966, so we've been collecting history of Anderson, Oconee, and Pickens for almost 60 years now. So I really wanted to highlight some of the artifacts that we have that concern that Black history and kind of show how vibrant of a community it was. So a lot of the photographs that are in our collections that you really can't find anywhere else are on display, both here and at Town Hall. The Keese Barn model, which has been, in storage at the Agricultural Museum, I'm delighted to put that on display, as well as some of our pieces related to the schools and kind of local communities that are around here. And each site has different things, different artifacts, different highlights, so I think it's important for people to visit both so you can actually get the full picture of what we're trying to display. Oh, so the first one is actually a photograph of Keese Barn before its demolition. Below that is the model, of course. On this behind me, we wanted to highlight the Deegan Faith Cabin Library, and the Deegan Faith Cabin Library is one of the last 2 faith cabin libraries built in South Carolina. In the 1930s, there was a white preacher out of Edgefield or Saluda area named Willie Lee Buffington, and he was concerned that African Americans of the South did not have the public libraries that white people did. So he made it his mission to establish these Black-centric libraries throughout the Southeast. There was something like 30 or 40 of them built between South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, just across the Southeast here. And the last 2 in South Carolina are located here in Pendleton, and the other one is in Seneca. We have footage here. This came from the state archives of the Faith Cabin Library in use in the 1940s. So this was, kind of a nice treat to show it in use, show the interior of the library as it was being used, and for the Pendleton Training School, which was the local high school for African American citizens. There's footage of that also. Oh, so the next picture is Silver Springs. That is one of the older Black churches here in Pendleton. It sprang out of Abel, which is in central Clemson area, and that is one of the oldest Black churches just for Pendletonians. We also highlighted King's Chapel a little bit, which is one of the older ones, and because we wanted to talk about these community gathering places where people actually met and had these events together. So we highlighted a lot of the churches. So we talk about Silver Springs, which is still in existence. I think the site has moved, and it has one of the oldest Black cemeteries still here in the upstate. We also talk about Jack Washington. His photo's down at the end. He was a renowned master violin player. He was a fiddle player. He was born at Fort Hill. He was enslaved there for the first part of his life, and after the end of the Civil War, he worked as a tenant farmer at the Woodburn Plantation. But Jack Washington, or they called him Daddy Jack, was sought out for his violin skills. He was a master musician. One of the historical articles says that he wasn't happy unless there was a fiddle in his hands. And the photo we have on display is actually one that we recently rediscovered. It was taken around 1900, and if you look in the photo of the background, it's taken probably where Vaqueros is now, because the Hunter Store warehouse is visible in the back. And then a few other things. We also want to talk about the Hunter Store, which is, of course, where our archives are located. The Hunter family was one of the few white merchants in town that would actually deal with Black people. They had account books and credit and sold to the Black community, not just of Pendleton, but the whole surrounding area, from everywhere from Pickens County all the way down to the bottom of Anderson, Abbeville, across the whole upstate. They were one of the few white merchants that would consistently deal with the Black community. So we have some of their ledgers on display.
I'm Dan Bonsall. I'm the branch manager at the Pendleton Library.
And tell me about the library's participation in this Black History exhibit and what all y'all are doing here.
Sure. So the library is partnering with the Pendleton Foundation for Black History and Culture and the Pendleton Historic Foundation. And we're providing the space along with the town hall to let the groups come and display some of their artifacts.
I noticed you had some books out here. Anything else you are doing to celebrate Black History Month here?
Yeah, so the library has a full schedule of programs across the county with speakers and activities focusing on all aspects of Black history and culture this month.
And what kind of response have you gotten so far from this exhibit?
We've gotten a lot of great feedback. People are always stopping in and letting us know how much they enjoyed the exhibit and how much they learned, and are able to kind of really uncover some lesser known aspects of some of the local history.
I'm Joanne Hill, and I work at the town of Pendleton.
And tell me about this exhibit y'all have here at Town Hall.
Well, this year we decided to focus on gathering places and the African American community in Pendleton. So our exhibit features some of the historic churches in Pendleton, as well as the Keith's Barn, which was a gathering place for a lot of African Americans. And we have a copy of Pendleton's segregation ordinance, which was in effect for 90 years. It was officially repealed in 2003.
2003, can you believe that?
No.
Have you gotten pretty good reception from this so far?
I have. It's been a little bit slow, but I expect more people to come through. Yeah.